a budget proposal for next fiscal year. And as some of you know, this committee recommended funding in several areas, food related, that tie in to a certain extent with what we're going to be hearing about this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kayla, and I will say there may be people coming into the room as you're speaking, and maybe people going out, hopefully not going out. But those of us who are here will be listening raptly.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think we are also expecting Gina from the Agency of Agriculture to join at some point. So if we could.
Gina is actually here with us in the committee room. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Hi, Gina.
Just off camera, maybe. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. For the record, my name is Kayla Strom. I'm a resident of Richmond, Vermont, and I serve as the Farm to School Program Manager at the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont, or NOFA VT. I work directly with schools, farmers, and distributors to strengthen Vermont's local food system. So I'm here today to discuss the significant impact of the recent cuts to the local Food for Schools and childcare funding, known as LFS-CC, and why continued investment in programs like this is critical for Vermont's food security, our agricultural economy, and the health of our students. So to give that background context, the first round of LFS began in December of 2021 when the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service launched the Local Food for Schools program, which helped states address supply chain and distribution issues and boost local and regional food systems. So the first round of LFS provided $200 million nationwide in commodity credit corporations and non-competitive funding to state agencies through cooperative agreements. 42 states and the District of Columbia benefited from this round, and the funding was solely for the purchases of local, unprocessed, or minimally processed foods from farmers, ranchers, and small businesses for distribution to schools participating in the National School Lunch Program. While states had the flexibility in program design, LFS could only be spent on the cost of food and not administrative costs. So in September of 2022, the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets received a $333,763 cooperative agreement from the USDA to purchase local food and distribute it to Vermont schools. This funding supported Vermont schools by providing them with free, locally sourced food through 4 nonprofit food hubs: Green Mountain Farm Direct, Food Connects, Acorn, and Vermont Farmers Food Center. In the school year of 2022 or 23-24, every school food authority in Vermont received a credit with which they could purchase local food through their assigned food hub. This program helped 147 local farms access school markets. 90 of those farms were from Vermont and 57 from neighboring states. Additionally, 66 of these farms made their first ever sale to schools. This initiative not only supported local producers, but it created valuable long-term purchasing relationships between schools and local food hubs. So this program was a huge success. The Vermont's implementation model was recognized at the national level for its innovative use of funds and farmer-focused model, one that directly subsidizes local farms, food hubs, and other producers. So in October of 2024, the USDA announced a second round of this funding called the Local Food for Schools and Childcare. So that now we're referring to LFS-CC. And that expanded scope included adding in childcare sites that are participating in the Child and Adult Care Food Program. So the second round, Vermont was awarded $1,222,000 in LFS-CC funding through a cooperative agreement through the Agency of Ag again. So this is the $1.2 million you've been hearing about. And so to break down these funds, $944,000 were designated to schools, and we were planning to distribute this through local food hubs, very similar to the previous LFS model. And new to this year, $277,000 was designated for those early childhood programs. So Vermont was actively developing its implementation plan, convening dozens of partners and stakeholders to ensure the most effective use of these funds. And the funding was poised to strengthen supply chains, improve food access, and create long-lasting farm-to-school and farm-to-early childhood connections, while generating meaningful revenue for Vermont farmers and food producers. However, on March 7th, 2025, the USDA abruptly announced the termination of this program, putting these vital connections and revenue at risk. This decision threatens not only local food access for schools and childcare sites, but the economic stability of Vermont farmers and food hubs that have been preparing for this next round of funding. The impact of the first round of LFS was undeniable. This funding created a powerful multiplier effect, supporting multiple farms, local processors, and distributors far beyond our initial investment. For example, thanks to the first round of LFS funding, Just Cuts, a vegetable processing program of the Center of Agriculture Economy, quadrupled its K-12 school sales through Green Mountain Farm Direct from 11 to 40. Becca, who's also here on this call, can speak more to this, but in our conversation yesterday, she shared that this is an example of a multiplier effect of increasing local spending. Just Cut sources from multiple farms who are all losing out on this increase of funding that was available through LFSCC. Another example is Pitchfork Pickle, whose sales increased through Green Mountain Farm Direct 1,000% due to the first round of LFS funding. So the termination of LFS funding means that 100% of that 1.2 million that would have gone directly into the hands of Vermont farmers and processors is now lost. The economic impact of this decision is significant, and the research shows that for every dollar spent on local food generates $1.60 in economic activity for Vermont. And in the case of LFSCC, that includes the innovation and industry growth of local processing that this financial investment was poised to continue fostering. So the ripple effects of this funding cut will be felt across Vermont's food system, from farms and processors to schools and early childhood centers. And it's a critical moment to advocate for continued investment in farm-to-school programs that support Vermont farmers, strengthen our local economies, and ensure that every child, regardless of age and income, has access to fresh, nutritious, and locally sourced food. So I do also want to make it clear what the termination of LFS does not include. So the cancellation of these funds does not impact Vermont's local food incentive program, the LFI, which you're all aware of, which provides additional per meal funds for local schools, meeting 15, 20, and 25% local purchasing targets. The LFS is a state funded, so it is unaffected by USDA's decision. This cancellation also does not affect per meal reimbursement rates for schools and meals. Cash in lieu of USDA foods for childcare, USDA foods, and also the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program are not affected by this federal decision. But I can't believe that it's only been a week since we learned that LFSCC was canceled, because in that short time I've been blown away by the outpouring of support and the collective call to action from Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network. Sorry, one sec. It's got a little it's just been so incredible. And there's been so many other states facing this same decision, and it's just been a challenge, and people are coming together and really championing this at the state level and also at a national level. So here in Vermont, I've received calls and emails from our members making it clear that they will not stand for this. As a network, we announced an open call to provide space for people to share how this cut is impacting them, their families, and their businesses, and to brainstorm solutions together. That call took place yesterday at noon, and within just 48 hours of promoting it, 70 people registered with 60 in attendance. And that just feels like a really powerful demonstration of how deeply this issue resonates across our community. The termination of LFSCC funding is more than just a budgetary decision. It directly affects Vermont children, farmers, and our food system. And so we've been collecting stories from those impacted, highlighting the consequences of these losses. Emily Ruff, the executive director of After School in Nature at Sage Mountain, shared that I run a DCF licensed after-school program in a rural, disadvantaged area that serves low-income youth and families. We were prepared to launch our first year of contract through this program, which would have served not only food insecure families, but also rural disadvantaged farmers. Both kids and farmers are losing with the closure of this program. Steve Davis, the nutrition director at Colchester School District, emphasized the impact on school meals. We were given $8,000 last school year thanks to LFS, and we were able to purchase local meats and vegetables to add to our district menus, and we had a lot of success. These purchases came through Food Connects, and the students loved the local food that they had on their menus. And since our program struggles to break even, I think the loss of this grant will be a big disappointment to our students. This is a great loss for our district, and I implore legislators to fight to keep this grant. Annie of Long Winter Farm in Stowe shared the impact that's having on small farms. We're a small farm, mostly CSA and retail, which is essential income to us, including selling to our children's school in town. Without LFSCC funding, this purchasing relationship is jeopardized. And just to share one more quote from Keith at Boyden Beef explained the financial hit to Vermont's local meat industry. This termination has significant impact on our business, a 10% decrease on average for weekly throughput, which equates to about 1 to 2 animals per week. We were beyond thrilled to be selling our beef to schools and feeding Vermont kids. Now our school buyers are turning to broadline distributors for beef sourcing from large feedlots out west. If you need anything from us to underscore the value of LFSCC and the impacts of its termination, please let us know. The cut to LFSCC is a part of a larger pattern of federal funding losses that are directly harming Vermont farmers and food access programs. Another critical loss is the Local Purchasing Food Assistance Program, LFPA, which is the sister program to LFSCC. You may have heard of the $1.6 million lost through programming, and that is the combination of LFSCC and LFPA. So like LFSCC, LFFPA was administered by the Agency of Agriculture and was designed to purchase food exclusively from Vermont farms, ensuring that local food was distributed at no cost to low-income Vermonters through food shelves and other community food security efforts. The loss of LFPA funding means fewer markets for Vermont farmers, fewer fresh food options for food insecure families, and a weakened local food economy. These cuts jeopardize the resilience of Vermont's food system, impacting not only those who grew the food, but also the children, the families, and the institutions that rely on it. So we urge the committee to stand with Vermont farmers, schools, and families by advocating for continued funding in local food programs such as LFSCC, which directly benefit our agricultural economy, ensure nutritious, locally sourced food for our youth. So right now we're working, around the clock to figure this out. So we're still putting a dollar amount to the figure. But we hope to be advocating for it on the Senate side soon for the state to invest in this program. So together we can continue to build a more resilient, equitable food system in Vermont. I really thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm just happy to be a resource and answer any questions moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. We've got a couple of questions here. Representative Boslin.
Thanks so much for your presentation. I'm going to have to go back and watch it again. I couldn't keep up taking notes with all the important things that you shared. The very end of your presentation, you mentioned, I think, LFFPA in terms of the local purchasing. I'm not sure if I've got the acronym right, but I'm just wondering, that sounds like the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program. What would have fed into that? Am I reading that correctly, or is this an additional program that has a similar model?
So I'm actually not positive of the connection there. I definitely have more familiarity with local food for schools and childcare. It's my area of work and to school, but the acronym is LFPA. I think I just put an extra F in by accident.
Okay, can you just say what that stands for again?
Yes, that's the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program.
Okay.
I think some context like Vermont Food Bank would be a really great organization to reach out to for testimony about the impacts of that specific program, and would be able to tie those two together.
Okay, thank you.
And just, Kayla, thank you. Can you just say again what LFPA, your understanding of what it does?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's food that is basically purchased at no cost. Well, the farmers are receiving funding, but it's distributed to food shelves and other community food security efforts like the Intervale Center and some other organizations.
Yeah.
And so that's for limited income Vermonters to receive free Vermont raised food.
Great. Representative O'Brien.
Taylor, just to get some context, budget wise, did these programs, were they essentially base programs that have been receiving funds, year after year, or was last year sort of a first time,
Yeah.
one time?
So they're
Bubble?
both one-time funding, yeah.
Okay. So just as you were standing them up, now they're back.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you say that
I
again?
just said, just as the programs were being stood up here, then the funding and funds were committed, now the funds are pulled back.
Exactly. So LFS was that first year we implemented the program in school year 23-24. And so that program has come and closed and was a really great success. And so this fall we were announced like the 2.0 version of the program LFS-CC. And we've been making plans. Food Hubs have been, organizing producers, getting ready to implement this $1.2 million, which was then cut last week.
Did the USDA provide any reasoning behind this?
Not to my knowledge, but I can look into it.
Thank you.
Do you work on a regular basis, Kayla, or have you worked with the USDA on this program or other programs?
I work more
Yourself?
so with the National Farm to School Network. I collaborate with them a little bit. As a previous food service director, I've worked with USDA operating the National School Lunch Program, but not currently, no. I mean, I've also been a grant recipient of the Farm to School grants through the USDA.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? I think I may have seen that nationally that the program, or maybe the two programs together, totaled on the order of $1 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do all 50 states, or were all 50 states expected to participate?
I know that the last round, I think 42 states did, but I don't know what this current round was going to be, but I can get that information and provide it back to the committee.
This may be a question that somebody else has an answer to. If you don't, Kayla, I'm wondering whether this is funding that would be categorized as, well, there's a new administration, they have a different set of priorities. We know that, and that happens, and that it's within their purview to change direction. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective. Or is this funding that was appropriated by a previous Congress and should not, in a new Congress, a new administration shouldn't be able to go back, just as we don't go back and say, we don't like what the legislature did 2 years ago. We're not going to give you the money that was promised, and that might result in a court case.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, because this was funded through the Commodity Credit Corporation, that is based off of the previous administration and doesn't go through Congress, but I will confirm that and get back to the committee.
Thank you. And maybe we should move along then. And Becca, would you like to speak next?
Sure, I'd love to. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, members of the House Ag Committee. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Becca Perrin. I'm the account manager for Green Mountain Farm Direct, which is a program of Green Mountain Farm to School based in Newport, Vermont. We are one of the 4 Vermont food hubs that administered the Local Food for Schools, or LFS, original funding program in the 2023-24 school year. The other hubs are Food Connects in Brattleboro, Acorn in Middlebury, and Vermont Farmers Food Center in Rutland. I'm here today to share the impact of the $333,763,000 in LFS funding on Vermont schools and regional farms, as well as to demonstrate the need for sustained investment to maintain the progress we've made in Vermont's farm to school movement. During the first installment of LFS in the 23-24 school year, All 4 hubs witnessed schools experiencing the benefits of local food for the first time, while our farm partners gained access to new school markets that were previously out of reach. This progress is now at risk without ongoing support. Food hubs are stewards of local food, acting as the intermediary between those interested in buying local products and farms and food businesses interested in selling them. We're the sales and customer service rep, broker, aggregator, inventory manager, distributor, and marketer all in one. And in Vermont, each of the 4 food hubs that administered LFS is a mission-driven nonprofit. So we are able to do this work while prioritizing impact over a bottom line. In fact, no administrative or personnel costs were allowed under LFS, so every cent of the $333,000 either paid for the food or for the costs associated with moving it. One of the most significant achievements of LFS was establishing delivery logistics to ensure that at least one of the 4 food hubs could serve all 69 SFAs, school food authorities in the state, no matter how rural. This was no small feat, given our state's geography. Thanks to these efforts, 90 individual Vermont schools ordered from a food hub for the very first time, creating brand new sales relationships and opening doors to local procurement. Feedback from schools showed high satisfaction with the local products. Many were excited to try items typically beyond their budget, such as specialty meats, cheeses, fresh-made pasta, lightly processed vegetables, and premium pickles and ferments. For other schools, LFS funds allowed them to substitute local options for staple ingredients like produce, yogurt, ground beef, maple syrup, and milk, integrating these into their regular menu items. One story comes from Megan Lavallee, school nutrition director at Maple Run Unified School District in St. Albans, who shared, quote, "With the support of LFS funds across all Maple Run schools, our students had the opportunity to discover foods they had never encountered before. Each day, they enjoyed treats such as maple cheese curds, pickled carrots, kimchi, even local hot sauce. While these items were very popular at the high school level, we were pleasantly surprised by the enthusiastic reactions from elementary students as well. Our school's fruit and veggie bars have never looked more appealing, filled with vibrant beets, rainbow carrots, and watermelon radishes. This exposure to beautiful Vermont veggies and the experience of trying a new, boldly flavored foods produced locally by our farmers will leave a lasting impression on our students," end quote. However, in the absence of funding support this school year, many of the newly engaged schools struggled to continue purchasing local food, not due to the lack of interest or demand, but because of the persistent budgetary constraints that LFS helped alleviate. On the farm side, 147 farms across the region benefited from LFS funds, with 66 farms making their first ever sale to a school during the LFS year. This proved that these farms offer products that fit food service specifications and demand while also catering to K-12 students' appetites. Nearly all of Green Mountain Farm Direct's producer partners experienced substantial sales growth in school markets. For example, as Kayla said earlier, Pitchfork Pickle of South Burlington saw a remarkable increase in school sales of 1,092%. Other producers like Blue Ledge Dairy of Salisbury saw 771% growth. Hurricane Flats of South Royalton saw 453%. Sweet Rowan Farmstead of West Glover saw 519%. And Berry Creek Farm of Westfield saw 443%. But it also again highlighted the persistent budget barriers that make these connections with school markets difficult to create and maintain without support. Notably, 97% of benefiting farms were small businesses, and 52% were socially disadvantaged as defined by the USDA. This funding supported equitable access for these farms to reach new markets and grow their businesses. Julia Irish, owner of Pitchfork Pickle, shared this perspective, quote, "Our reason for being is locally grown produce. We make pickles and ferments from Vermont-grown vegetables. We saw a substantial jump in schools ordering our products for use in their meal programs last year. The funding cuts impact not just our company's sales, but the local farmers we buy from. The disconnect between the school food program budgets and the reality of costs of production for local food have historically made this relationship prohibitive, whereas the LFS program bridged that gap. This program seems like a win for everyone. Nutritious food in schools, supporting local farms and food producers, keeping funds in our local and often rural economies. Cutting it doesn't make sense and feels like a spiteful cost-cutting measure that hurts everyone involved. End quote. The success of LFS has shown that Vermont has the infrastructure, farms, and schools ready to prioritize local food, excuse me. However, without sustained funding, some of the progress we've made will fade. Programs like LFS are not just about putting fresh food on students' plates. They're about strengthening local economies, supporting farm viability, and ensuring that every child has access to nutritious, delicious meals. The 1.2 million in funding for Vermont under LFSCC, this program that was cut, would have built on the momentum created by the first installment of LFS, ensuring that the connections between schools and farms continue to grow and thrive. The multiplier effect of the $1.60 per $1 spent on local food that Kayla mentioned would mean that 1.92 million would go back into the local economy, making the investment meaningful beyond students and supporting farms. For schools, it would have meant the ability to plan menus confidently around seasonal local ingredients, ensuring that students continue to benefit from fresh, nutritious foods year-round, while fostering a deeper understanding of where their food comes from. Since the program was planned to span 2 school years, 2025 to 26 and 26 to 27, schools could have been able to make long-term purchasing decisions to sub in local products for commodities and conventional items, and save budget dollars for future years. For farmers, it would have created dependable, long-term demand, allowing them to lean into these new market opportunities, forward plan, invest in scaling their operations, and diversify product offerings. This investment would have a far-reaching ripple effect across Vermont's economy, impacting every stop along the journey from the farmers growing the vegetables to the folks processing and packaging them like Pitchfork Pickle or Just Cut, to warehouse staff and truck drivers at the Center for an Agricultural Economy, to school kitchen staff receiving deliveries and preparing the food, to students enjoying the fresh meals, to teachers and families who share the benefit of a well-fed child. This is the values-driven, strong local supply chain that Vermont needs and deserves. Ultimately, LFS proved that schools want local food, producers can meet the demand, and food hubs play a crucial role in making it all happen. However, without sustained funding, much of this progress is at risk. The 1.2 million from LFSCC would have meant maintaining these connections, strengthening Vermont's local food system, and ensuring schools have reliable access to fresh, high-quality, locally sourced ingredients, as well as create brand new opportunities for connection between early childhood centers and local farms. I urge you to consider the long-term benefits that programs like LFSCC bring to our communities and to support ongoing funding that builds on this foundation. Together, we can create a resilient farm-to-school network that nourishes our students, empowers our farmers, and sustains Vermont's agricultural future. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Becca. Questions? Representative O'Brien.
Becca, can you explain? I'm just trying to figure out the lay of the land on food hubs. You mentioned 4 Vermont food hubs, but there's also like the Intervale and the Farm Connects in Hardwick.
Yeah.
I count up 6 or 7 according to the agency. So I just wondered if you could explain how they all work.
Sure, that's a really good question. So the Intervale, at the time that we launched this LFS program and we're sort of convening potential partners, the Intervale was not doing wholesale sales at the time. They were doing direct to consumer sales. So they would sort of have like an open air farmers market where folks can come and purchase items. These 4 food hubs were at wholesale scale and had trucks that were ready to go. CAE Farm Connects is not a sales food hub. They're purely a freight service. They're a nonprofit freight service that provides an essential service to farms in Vermont, and they're actually our distribution partner. Green Mountain Farm Direct is a sales-only hub, and we partner with Farm Connects to put the product on the trucks and the trucks on the road. So we couldn't do it without them, but they don't hold the sales relationships with customers. They just provide freight for farms.
And Myers Produce was mentioned too.
Exactly, yeah. And they mostly ship their product out of state. So these 4 folks that were identified for this program, these 4 food hubs, were positioned in places around the state that made it possible for us to cover the entire state, which we previously weren't doing before LFS, and LFS enabled us to do that. So we were positioned around the state in a way that enabled us to find a way to cover the entire state. And we were all in a position to hold these sales relationships and with the producers as well as the customers. So that's what
Great,
we all
thank you.
kind of all have in common. Yeah. There's a saying that if you have met one food hub, you've met one food hub. We're all doing something slightly different, but all filling a need within our own communities.
All right, thank you, Becca. Let's switch over then to hear from Cynthia.
Wonderful. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, and thank you very much for hearing my statements today. For the record, my name is Cynthia Green. I live in South Burlington, and I work at Shelburne Farms and with Vermont Feed as the Farm to Early Childhood Partnership Coordinator. And I'm here this morning to also share how the recent cut to the local Food for Schools and Child Care program may directly impact early childhood programs, families, farms, and food distribution innovations for early childhood. As you heard, it's a devastating loss. 1.2 million, as Kayla noted, that will directly impact our farmers. We know this. And while that's a deep impact, we're also incredibly concerned about the impact for early childhood programs, especially those operating the Child and Adult Care Food Program, many of which operate on razor-thin margins and struggle to maintain their nutrition programming. And I'll just note that this new iteration, this year's Local Food for Schools and Childcare, was only going to be available for those childhood programs that operate the Child Adult Care Food Program. So not all of our early childhood programs across Vermont, which means that in Vermont, there are just over 300 early childhood programs that participate in the Child Adult Care Food Program, and they would have benefited directly from that $277,000 designated funding for childcare. Early childhood nutrition services are drastically under-resourced. Administrative funding is almost non-existent, and the local food for school and childcare funding could have shored up local food-related expenses, which then could have eased financial tensions that would have allowed programs to invest in kitchen infrastructure, staffing, and other nutrition service expenses. Also, all while maintaining high-quality, nutritious foods in their menus. Another ripple effect of this federal cut is that due to the timing of the cut and therefore the understandable capacity constraints of our Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets staff, who are then managing these frenetic circumstances, our state, so our Agency of Agriculture State Community Supported Agriculture Grant for Early Childhood Programs is also not being offered this year. So Kayla talked about sort of planning and then replanning. Becca's talked about that too. This was one of the impacts of the federal cut, is that our local food, our Community Supported Agriculture Grant is not available to early childhood programs this year. This is another resource loss to our early childhood field, and it will further limit their access to local nutritious foods. Based on the 2024 data, the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets awarded about $45,000 to early childhood programs for CSAs across the state. However, this grant is structured so that that amount of money would pay for a maximum of 80% of any share, which means then that there's about a total loss. Programs had to pony up, if you will, the other 20%, which means there's a total loss to Vermont producers upwards of $56,000. I think it's really important, I want to really underscore this next note, is that while the CSA grant is not available this year, that pot of funding through the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants Program with Agency of Agriculture has been reallocated to the Vision Grant opportunity. Early childhood programs could apply and request support for local food access through the Vision Grant opportunity. However, that particular program does not leverage any additional funding. So there's going to be a net loss, and it's unlikely that all of that funding will go to local purchasing. So again, there will be a net loss for our farming community. Losing access to financial support for local food naturally causes early childhood programs to consider their operating budgets and make really tough purchasing decisions. Programs consistently have indicated that they may not be able to keep up with food price points, and if local foods are more expensive, they'll need to make alternative choices. In some instances of financial crisis, like during the pandemic, for instance, early childhood programs actually shuttered their nutrition services altogether and did not reopen them. These decisions obviously impact local purchasing, and of course, they impact families. Many families rely on early childhood programs for nutrition services, which often introduce families to local producers through community events, highlighting farm products and farms on their local menus, or through educational activities. And all of these activities then expand farm markets to the families through relationship-based programming. On the call yesterday that Kayla referenced, with the Farm to School and Early Childhood Network, you've already heard a statement from Annie Parody. I happen to work with Annie, and the early childhood program that her children go to is Mountain Village School in Stowe. They have developed an amazing relationship. Annie, as you heard, she serves and sells food directly to that early childhood program. But through that program, she has now made additional connections, she said, to Stowe residents, to the families, to Stowe businesses, and it's actually expanded their CSA model for themselves. We also have a story that we've collected in the past from Laura Butler. She is a family child care operator in Milton. She has developed a relationship with Christine, Farmer Christine of Blue Heron Farm. She initially developed this relationship through our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Market CSA grant in the previous year. But she and Farmer Christine both tell the story about how that initial grant has then expanded Christine's access to families and even Laura's neighbors. So families were receiving some of the food through that connection in the program. Her neighbors were seeing the truck roll up and Farmer Christine distribute food to the early childhood program. And so now some of those neighbors and some of those families are purchasing personal CSAs. And then finally, Beth Traver-Adolphus happened to also be on the call yesterday, and I've talked with her in more detail about some of her programming. She is with Oak Hill Children's Center in Pownell, and she shared how local farmers and producers have supported their annual Family Farm Day, which is an event where farmers and producers showcase their farm animals, their farm machinery. They might provide gardening activities or tips and tricks to families and children. And then, of course, they contribute and their products are highlighted at a community harvest dinner, which they all share together. It is because families are so intimately connected to our early childhood programs that these early childhood programs then are uniquely positioned to foster farm to family relationships, and they can model through the program's local purchasing values and practices and impact how families make choices about local purchasing as well. So again, there's the potential loss of family market expansion to some degree. Another impact of the loss of the local Food for Schools childcare funding that concerns me personally is the work that our partners in the Upper Valley region have been advancing to improve food access and distribution to early childhood programs in that region. While the local Food for Schools childcare funding had not yet supported this project, partners were relieved and we were planning to increase their local food purchasing by leveraging and maximizing those dollars. That funding was also poised to help partners leverage other funding streams. And those other funding streams would have been able to support additional aspects of the pilot, such as equipment and infrastructure needs, fiscal agent and administrative supports, and any sort of distribution costs. The goal of the pilot right now is to test purchasing and distribution options that can increase food access and local food purchasing power of early childhood programs. And I should say the Upper Valley was targeted, specifically that community of early childhood programs, because they are in a USDA designated low food access area. Many of those programs were going actually to New Hampshire, which was the closest grocery store or box store for them to get foods. And they wanted to keep their dollars local, and they wanted to work with a group and try on a pilot for better local food access. And so we're also working with Upper Valley Produce on this particular project. I will also say that this particular program or pilot project is open to any registered early childhood program in the Upper Valley region. So this includes those, it expands access to those who are not participating in the child adult care food program, which is pretty significant. Only about a third of Vermont's early childhood programs operate CACFP, and there are a whole bunch of reasons why, but only about a third. So this again would expand market opportunity. And so just in summation, the loss of the local food for schools childcare funding will require partners to re-examine our local food purchasing based on budget constraints and other project-related expenses. And so the net result is it's really dampening our innovation and our thinking about what local food access looks like for early childhood. Finally, it would be remiss of me not to mention Vermont's childcare legislation, Act 76. So bear with me just for a minute, please. This act has shored up early childhood systems and services by decreasing financial stressors for both programs and families, providing workforce stabilization resources, increasing system capacity to serve more children. It has also allowed many of our programs to maintain and improve nutrition services. Should any portion of this particular act be rolled back or funding be cut, it will be another devastating loss for our early childhood programs. We know through focus groups organized by Hunger Free Vermont that when early childhood programs are faced with agonizing financial choices to stabilize their overall programming, nutrition services are often one of the very first services they cut. It is very expensive, and those even operating the child adult care food program, that program was never designed to cover the full cost of nutrition services in early childhood. And right now, the reimbursable rates for approved meals usually covers just about only the food cost, and sometimes not even in these current times. So it's inexpensive. Nutrition services are expensive. And Act 76 has helped shore up nutrition services in many ways. So at this moment in time, Vermont's early childhood system faces the loss of the local food for schools and childcare funding, which people were gearing up for. For this year only, they will not have access to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets community-supported agriculture grants, and they're facing a proposed cut in Act 76 funding. These losses will absolutely impact local purchasing decisions. It could mitigate market potential of our 900 early childhood programs across the state. It is likely to decrease family exposure to our local producers. It could actually jeopardize and destabilize nutrition programming as a whole. And of course, then that could then leave families and young children more susceptible to food insecurity conditions. The ripple effects of these losses are admittedly challenging to quantifiably forecast and give you hard numbers, because this was going to be the first year that childcare could take advantage of this federal program. But we know through the stories and we know through the challenges of our early childhood system that when they face financial challenges, nutrition services and local food purchasing is going to decrease. Thank you so very much for your time and attention, and I'm very happy to answer any questions if I can.
Okay, thank you very much, Cynthia. Do we have any committee questions? I just wanted to confirm that the CSA program that you mentioned a couple of times, that's not funded for the coming year because there was an expectation that the program would be funded through this federal source. Is that a fair statement?
Not
Or through other
quite.
sources?
Not quite. And I would say Jean is in the room, so she could answer this definitively. But what I understand is the capacity of our Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to stand up local food for school and childcare was impacting the ability for that agency to also attend to the administration of the CSA grant this year. And again, we were planning to have access to the federal funds, which is why it was an administrative capacity challenge for this year only, for 2025, but that the intent is to bring it back in 2026.
Got it. Thank you. Well, Gina, then if you would like to come up, you can either elaborate on that or speak to whatever you'd like to speak to.
Thanks for having me. For the record, Gina Clitheroe, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I am our Farm to Institution Program Manager. And I prepared comments that provided kind of like an overview of the Local Food for Schools program, what was achieved using that first round of funding from USDA in 2022, what we had planned on, we're expecting to be able to do with this funding that we had received in a cooperative agreement in 2025. I do feel like folks on the call gave a pretty solid overview of the programs. So yeah, maybe I'll spend time kind of specifically talking about the state grant program and kind of like some of our decision making around pausing the CSA grant. And I think, yeah, so when we heard that we were going to, that this funding was going to be available for the local food for schools and childcare programs, the agency made a decision of like, okay, there's a lot, this is a new program that we're launching, especially the new component of serving childcare programs. So as we were preparing our project plan for USDA, we were preparing to run the local food for schools and childcare program has these two buckets of funds, one for schools, one for childcare. And the schools budget was about 3 times what it was in like our first round of local food for schools funding. But in our plan that we had been working on with partners over the last several months, we decided that we were going to run kind of like the same process for the local food for schools and childcare program. We were going to work with food hubs. We were going to have an RFP to invite additional food hubs to participate. Intervale Food Hub was one of the food hubs that didn't participate in the last round, but was interested and curious and has capacity now for wholesale markets. So we were going to run another similar local food for schools program. And so that wouldn't be too much of a lift for us to make that happen. But when it came to launching the new childcare program, there was a lot of planning and discussion around like, how do we do this in a way that's administratively feasible for reaching a majority of those 300 or so, 250 or so early childcare programs that would have been eligible for receiving food through this grant. A lot of them are small family childcare programs that have maybe 2 to 8 kids, like over half are in that size range. And so that was a decision that the agency made was, okay, let's pause the CSA grant for this year because we have the flexibility within the authorizing statute for the Agency of Ag Farm to School Grants program to adjust our grant offerings each year based on kind of like the needs in the community. So we took that $50,000 that we had previously allocated to the CSA grant, we moved it to the Vision grant, which is open now, currently accepting applications. As Cynthia mentioned, local food purchasing would be an eligible expense for programs that want to apply. But the CSA grant in its like previous form is not available this year, which is a loss, and we're aware of that. And then so when we heard that the USDA was terminating our cooperative agreement for the additional funding that we were going to have around 277,000 for early childcare, local purchasing. We are the agency is kind of in a moment of like, okay, do we still feel okay about that decision to pause the CSA grants program? What do we do? We're still figuring that out. Because yeah, as Cynthia noted, this is a huge loss to the early childhood community, and to the producers that would benefit from those direct relationships with early child care programs. Yeah.
Representative O'Brien.
Do you know how much was committed for the CSA program, the cut cost?
$50,000 was the amount that we had prepared to allocate to that specific project. And that was about, I think last year we had awarded about $45,000 in grants for the CSA grant program.
Representative Dawson.
The child care program. A lot of that was funded with the new 0.04 tax, payroll tax. I believe.
So that was to fund in general the Act 76 expansion of the assistance for parents and direct payments to providers. I don't know, possibly somebody can answer that question better than I can, whether food programs in general were part of that.
Where I'm going with that fund had money left over in it. Fair amount of money left over in it. And could we find out who to talk to? Could they take some monies from that program, especially if it's a one-time ask, to use it to fund this program?
Idea.
Thanks for that great question. And it's creative. And it is possible. So yes, it was the payroll tax that funded Act 76. Yes, actually, partners worked very hard to ensure that there was a nutrition services line item included in that cost of care, which was then the basis for that request and that payroll tax. So yes, nutrition services can be included and can be supported through Act 76 dollars. One of the challenges I will just say is we are in a childcare crisis. There are not enough slots. So the other part of the funding that Act 76 supports is actually increasing the number of childcare slots in our state. There's also an incredible workforce shortage. And so Act 76 dollars also go to support the workforce, either through increased compensation, access to benefits, or professional development that gets them the credentials that they need in order to work in the workforce. So Act 76 is very comprehensive. It's not just about reducing family tuition. It's about the other supports the early childhood system needed. As it relates to potentially using that pot of money that's on hold, I think there are other folks with other perspectives that you would definitely want to talk to about that, including, I would say, the Child Development Division, who also helps support quality in other ways with that funding. We want to make sure that the system is stabilized as a whole. And we do fully intend partners. I should have said I'm an early childhood educator and I ran an early childhood program for decades, including the CACFP program. And I have worked for the Child Development Division in early childhood settings. So it's a very complicated question. You would want to get multiple perspectives would be my suggestion, but it's creative and there is an avenue for it.
Go ahead.
Cynthia, do you know Chris Nelson from Let's Go Kids?
I do. I believe she is a family childcare operator in the
Yes.
Northeast Kingdom.
She's my cousin.
Of course she
So,
is. Yes, I know, Chris knows.
I wouldn't do anything to jeopardize the program because she'd come drop a cinder block on my head in the middle of the night.
Go, Chris.
So, but there, I realized there was monies left over last fiscal year. And I realized everyone's trying to develop the program and it hasn't reached maturation yet. That's my $5 word of the day, John.
I love it.
And, but if we could tap into some of that to span this year without, because we passed crossover. I mean, I've had other ideas as well, but it may be just a couple stones in a muddy brook to get across, to keep our feet dry.
Great question, creative solution.
Yeah, let's not, we'll continue that.
Yes.
That conversation. Representative O'Brien.
Just following up on Richard's thoughts, how much, just in a big sum way, is disappearing of USDA dollars, and how much collectively, all of you in conversations, maybe the food bank too, you think if we were going to backfill, what's enough to get us across the muddy brook, as Richard's saying, this year? Is there sort of a number out there? Just because, as you know, there are not a lot of extra dollars floating around here, but it's so important, we would certainly support a pitch.
I think at this point, we're just still calculating exactly what that number is and hope to have it in the coming days. But at this point, we're still figuring that out, but
Okay.
stay tuned.
Kayla, or anyone, just thinking about the timing of this decision, this conversation, that farmers presumably have begun to, I'm not a farmer, but have begun to plan for the upcoming growing season. And some of that planning may have included making purchases, buying seeds, for example. So can you talk a little bit about what you understand anyway to be what's already happened that, as opposed to, well, it's too bad we won't be able to buy this food from farmers. Are there other implications that, the wheels are already in motion?
Yeah.
And Gina, you may know the answer to that too, or have an answer.
I think I'll let Kayla respond to that. I think I don't have so much of a perspective as to what the planning has looked like for the farms. I feel like the food hubs might have more insight into that. I've been more on the administrative, what are the mechanisms for moving the money around and getting it to schools and early childcare programs, and not so much how do we line up the supply to meet the demand. That would be more on the food hubs, and NOFA as someone who works directly with farms who are serving schools and early childcare programs.
Okay, well then, Kayla, do you want to take a stab at it, or?
I'd actually let Becca speak to this. I see.
Thank you. Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. Well, I'll say that we were in the early planning stages of the LFSCC program, so we hadn't necessarily announced to any of our school partners nor our farm partners that this funding was coming. We had hinted to it, especially when we were talking to, we do a lot of forward planning with our farms for other programs that we do. So, and schools, there's a lot of what they do is planned well in advance of the coming school year. So farms rely on that sort of advance information for a lot of their crop planning and for slaughtering as well, and storage, and accounting for storage space and all these things. So we hadn't fully gotten deep into the conversation with our farm partners about exactly how much money would be coming to them regionally, but that was coming. That conversation was coming, and you're right that they're starting now to plant for summer and fall harvests. So we were just getting sort of to that stage of the planning process when the funding was cut. And you're absolutely right that farms rely on these dollars in advance, which is why the LFSCC program was so exciting, because we had plenty of time to prepare them. And we had 2 school years with which that we were planning to use this funding, so that we're planning that schools would spend it. So that was hugely impactful in terms of how our farm partners were able to plan their crops and their storage capacity. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. So I'll just ask whether anybody has anything else they wanted to add before we let you all go. Been very helpful, useful testimony. I did also want to ask, since somebody mentioned the food bank, I don't know whether you're prepared, Carrie, to say anything and would like to say anything. If not, that's fine, but
I can probably help answer that question.
okay.
That particular question, if you want me to.
Sure, yeah, well, yeah, maybe
Yeah.
for all of us to hear.
Okay, I'm Carrie Saylor. I am the Government Affairs Officer for Vermont Food Bank. And the question earlier was about whether the LFPA, so the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement, is the official title, whether that program supported the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program, and the answer is no. It did not directly support that Vermont Food Bank implemented program. The agency of iFood and Markets implemented the LFPA program independently. That money did go to support some of the same local organizations on the ground who were doing community food access work. I think a good example is Brock Community Action. They operate lots of food programs in Rutland and a few in Bennington. Their Rutland food shelf used LFPA money to contract directly with a farm in addition to Vermonters Feeding Vermonters. The total amount last year, there's actually a page on the Ag Food and Market website for the LFPA programs listing the grant recipients and the amounts each of them received, and the total amount last year was $430,000. I don't know anything about what will be anticipated for 2025. And then the other piece I can address, Chair Durfee, was your question around the change in administration. So the funding for these programs comes through a part of the USDA called the Commodity Credit Corporation. Each presidential administration has some discrepancy over how that is spent. It's referred to federally as discretionary funding. That I know that the LFPA funding, and it sounds like Kayla is also saying that the child care portion was discretionary funding through the Commodity Credit Corporation. I think the surprising piece was the lack of formal announcement of this change and the administration taking a program which was essentially in motion, like the child care piece had planning happening, it was sort of moving along, and abruptly ending that. There is usually much more thoughtful lead time and communication with implementing state agencies and the organizations on the ground doing grant implementation. So while this has happened before with other administrations ending programs that the previous administration started, there's usually a little more lead time.
Okay, good. That's helpful.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that then? So when you mentioned I think you said 435,000 was the amount that was going to go for the local.
It was the 2024 number, so I can assume it was similar to
Now,
that.
was that part of the 1.2 million?
Yeah.
So that's,
I think it's 1.7.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
math on this is
It's in addition to the 1.2.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think 1.7 is the
okay, so
total
wait a minute.
that we're all thinking maybe.
Okay,
but
yeah, so it sounds really similar in that money goes forward and then it supports local farmers. And so as I would interpret that, then the fact that if that program is lost, that makes the need for something like Vermonters Feeding Vermonters even more important in terms of trying to sustain our farmers who are going to be losing this substantial chunk of resources that they were counting on.
That's accurate.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. Anything else? Thank you, John.
Gary, how much is the Vermont Food Bank potentially losing from USDA cuts?
Right now, it's very hard to tell. There are a few changes that have been made that may result in cuts, not to dollars, but to food, which is hard for me to quantify. And those I'm not even sure of because the communication isn't there. I can say one of the bigger challenges we're having is that USDA staff who was fired in the Northeast Regional Office they're our point people for some of that information. And so they are no longer working there and it's very hard to get accurate, timely information about changes. So I think my answer, like how much has been cut as of today, March 20th, 2025, no dollars that I'm clearly aware of. But there are some concerns that we have for federal food programs going, but we're sort of just in a wait and see mode. As are the agency partners that we work with for those programs at AHS and AOE.
We have, and I'm sorry we weren't able to do it all at the same time. Tomorrow, Abby Willage coming in from the agency to speak to this subject. I think we'll also cover the other programs. I don't want to even say the letters, so we'll get it wrong. The four letters rather than the. And maybe you can speak to us also a little bit about those USDA staffing cuts, because we've heard, and we know that again, with change in administration, there's change at the top. But in addition to that, we've heard, at least anecdotally, that there were other cuts, staffing cuts, and understanding, what that looks like, I think would be useful for us to know as well. So I think we can stop then. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Those who joined remotely, appreciate it. Thank you, Jana, for coming in.
Thank you.
Committee, I think we may do a little reordering, and I see Mike came in. We asked, here's Brian. Hi, Brian.
All right.
Brian, I think maybe given that we need to be on the floor in a few minutes, I'm going to give you the opportunity to say, we can put this off until next week, just so that we're not.
Oh,
Yeah, we just wrapped up.
so you're running late.
Yes, we are.
I was
Yeah.
panicking, like I felt so bad. I'm like, it's 10 people won't leave me alone. So I'm like, I have to do this thing. So okay, we can do it this weekend.
Are we on the floor?
Yep.
So why don't we can end the meeting. Goodbye, everyone.